I think it's inevitable that I'm going to get finished with tonight's and finish with last night's and start tonight's and not get through it. My personality is such that I just dig into the details. And sometimes I try to pull out, like I got rid of half my slides for these presentations. I had that much more detail, and it's still too much. So this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that on Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, I'll finish up tonight's, so that at 7 o'clock, we can finish tomorrow's. So you get four.
Stay here overnight, right?
You get 4 presentations for the price of 3. And since it's free, you get it for nothing. That's not really the right word. Comfortable. Less afraid of scientists. Because that was pretty much my goal last night, was just to show you that the Big Bang, it's got lots of noise and volume and, right? But it's very low on content. Yeah. And another big thing I think we came out with last night is we've got to be really careful not to believe what we've seen on science fiction TV and movies. Because there's so much that is used to make conclusions that isn't even science. It's just, it's some guy with a script writer, you know. So. All right, well, let's launch in. Are you ready, Randy?
Yep.
All right.
I'm ready.
So yesterday we were talking about DNA. Here's the big long word, deoxyribonucleic acid. I could take that all apart. It's an acidic molecule that's used in the nucleus. It's made with a ribose sugar, and it's missing an oxygen. That's why it's deoxyribonucleic acid. Big deal. Well, the big deal is that this molecule controls your whole life. Honestly, every cell in your body has all the instructions to make a brand new you. And they're doing it in the laboratory. Well, pieces of people. They can grow a new liver for you. The problem is that the same DNA that made the bad liver that you need replaced will make the new bad liver in the laboratory. So, I mean, it's not a perfect system. But deoxyribonucleic acid, I just want to go through the facts that we had yesterday. All living organisms have DNA. DNA controls all the activities in a cell, and thus the organism. All DNA uses the same building blocks: guanine, cytosine, thymine, and adenine. All living creatures use those 4 building blocks to build their DNA out of. All of them. And that allows DNA to be taken from one living creature and put in another. Example I told you yesterday. They can take the insulin gene out of a pancreas cell, human pancreas cell, put it into a bacteria, stimulate that bacteria, and that bacteria will make human insulin. They make human growth hormone. That's another one that they make a lot of in the laboratory using bacteria. It's phenomenal. It's wonderful. It's medically fantastic. But it makes you think. You see, from an evolutionary standpoint, they think it's obvious that all living creatures who all use the same DNA started from the same ancestor. See, it makes sense, doesn't it? We're going to discuss that in detail. So I want to just teach you how DNA works. I'm going to try to just make it, it is so mind-boggling complex. And that's a good point for us to contemplate right now. It is so mind-boggling complex. All the things that happen for DNA to go from the instructions to a protein. There are so many things involved. I'm going to just rattle on a bunch of it and realize I'm giving you the kindergarten version. It's the one I understand. If you want to learn about DNA, you'll get a book yay thick. It's that complex. When I see something that complex, I think, and this all came to be? No, I don't think so. So, you have your DNA. It's coiled up in such a compressed thing that you can't even get to a gene. It's bound up with a whole bunch of proteins, literally stack it up and file it away. When your cell needs a protein, it unwinds the DNA from the chromosome. It gets it stretched out. If you stretch all your DNA out, it's like from here to the moon, okay? It's that long of a molecule. So it's phenomenal that when you need a hormone, a growth hormone, the cell can say, oh yeah, that's over here. It's on chromosome number blah, 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 and it's in here, and it can unravel the DNA and get to the base sequence. That's the base sequence, the different colors. You have to take the DNA, make it into messenger RNA, then it can become a protein, but it's a little more complex than that. Here's your chromosome down here, okay? You see it? There's your chromosomes. So they have to be unraveled. They're bound with histones and all kinds of complex library information. You know, like when you go to the library and you look for a book, you have these Dewey Decimal numbers? Well, it's like way more complicated than that. But these guys are all addresses. So they unwind it, and here is a section of DNA that is a gene for something, like insulin. This section of DNA is how you make insulin. But before you can make insulin, you have to unwind it and unzip it. There's just so much that has to go on. Okay, so it unzips. This is as complicated as we're going to get tonight. It unzips. It forms messenger RNA, and by the way, that requires a special translator molecule that gets there. It reads the DNA. It figures out what needs to come in as a messenger RNA, and it hooks them up, one base pair at a time. So once the messenger RNA is made in the nucleus, it sends the messenger RNA out into the cytoplasm. Okay, you have the nucleus, then you have the rest of the cell. Out in the rest of the cell is where the messenger RNA goes. You never take the DNA out of the nucleus. Can't afford for that DNA to get messed up. Keep that in the office. But we send out the copy. Once the copy's out here, you get transfer RNA, which are very incredibly specific molecules that are able to read 3 bases at a time, hook onto a amino acid, so that as this ribosome, and you understand what I'm saying, there's so many things. This ribosome is made of 2 parts. It links up and snacks onto the messenger RNA. It goes on, reads this, and calls for the right transfer RNA to come. They match up. We're talking on such a tiny molecular size you can't even see it with an electron microscope. Well, you can barely see it. It's that small. And yet, it clicks along. You know, if there's one mistake, guess what? It doesn't work. Do you know how many billions of molecules are being made in your body right here, right now? Billions! And it's all just chunking along. It's incredibly precise. So, the transfer RNA reads a codon, that's 3 base pairs. That matches up with a specific amino acid that it links up to a chain, a growing chain of amino acids. Now, this chain, every time it comes on, this moves over 3, gets the new amino acid, over 3. And by the way, there's a special thing that links these amino acids together and bonds them, kind of like spot welding, but a whole lot more specific. Finally, you'll get a great big long chain of amino acids. It's not a protein yet. That has to be carefully and very precisely folded, twisted, bent. It's got 4 levels of shape. It has to be the right sequence, it has to be the right folds, it has to be the right 3D dimensions, and it has to have the right active sites. We're talking about a specificity that is just beyond, above and beyond anything you can imagine. And it's all going along in the soup of the cytoplasm. There are little motors. I kidded yesterday, there was this little guy with gloves and a parka on, taking stuff here and there of little forklifts. It's not very different than that. In the cell, there are all these microtubules and microfilaments that are like a transit system. So that the transit system literally brings the right transfer RNA at the right time to the right spot, clicks it in, zips it up, makes the molecule, bends it, folds it, and produces it, then hooks it to a semi-truck, little guy in a little, beep, beep, and away he goes. And he takes that protein to the cell membrane where then it's linked up with an, I'm losing my breath. It's linked up, shipped. Yeah, there's FedEx in the cell. They make these little vesicles, stick the things in like a cardboard box, put it in the shipping department, gets shipped out, dumped in the bloodstream, and voila, growth hormone is going around your body to the exact place it's needed. It is so incredibly detailed, specific, and marvelous. Okay, so regarding our discussion, a cell must have a completely functional system in order to survive. You will not get a new cell unless an old cell is able to do all the building and assembly and production of the new cell ahead of time. That's why Schleif and Swan, we talked about them last night, that's why they say that all cells come from pre-existing cells. Because cells need to be built. They don't just happen. Okay, so what does that have to do with evolution? Well, the formulation of life, the first cell, they say something happened in a pool. A bunch of chemicals came together. Sorry. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. That would be like going down to the stone quarry and blasting something off the wall, and all of a sudden there's a miniature Empire State Building there. It's like, wow, where'd that come from? You can't get something so highly designed unless there's something to design it. And that's the cell. So let's talk about DNA. The origin of DNA, where could DNA come from? This instruction chain. You see, you can't make a cell without the instructions. So where did it come from? Well, I believe that God designed DNA to store the information necessary for living organisms to survive, adapt, and reproduce. That's what I believe. It's the only thing that makes any sense. RNA, that's this intermediary. There's messenger RNA, there's transfer RNA. It's an intermediary to take the information and translate it into an actual protein. This is one of the things that evolutionists are trying to get us to believe, is that RNA forms spontaneously in the primordial soup. So washing back and forth in primordial soup, this chain just happened to form. Okay? And then was transcribed as the DNA, so it had some kind of reverse transcriptase, which does exist in bacteria, and it made the DNA molecule. Well, they laugh at me for believing in a God. I return the favor. I have to laugh at them for thinking that RNA can form spontaneously. RNA is a super amazingly complex molecule. Here's another option, okay? Maybe proteins form spontaneously and then were used as templates to make RNA and then finally DNA. Do you remember when we talked about chemogenesis yesterday? What did we learn about chemogenesis? Nice idea. If you don't have God, you've got to come up with something, but it is not robust enough to create the molecules needed for life. So when someone comes up and they say, oh, but DNA evidence shows, you can just say, hold it right there. And ask the person, have you studied about DNA? Do you know how detailed and specific DNA is? Ask them a few questions. See if they know their stuff. What you'll find most of the time is that people who are the loudest about evolution know the least. Because for me, the more I studied about evolution, the more I learned about it, the less I could believe that it could form spontaneous. Okay? It's just how I roll. Origin of DNA summary. Okay, so here's the bottom line for me. It is difficult to imagine or explain the creation or function of DNA apart from a full complement of proteins, molecular machines that work with the DNA to identify the needed molecules. In other words, you've got to have all the parts, all the pieces, the machines and the transcriptors and the there's a whole organelle in the cell that just folds proteins. That's the whole job of this organelle. It takes this big long chain and it folds it in the right place, turns it in the right place, bonds it in the right place, and makes it usable. You can have all the amino acids in the right order, but if it's not folded right, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You're going to find that over and over, when you get to the facts and you say, okay, so show me how this works, there is going to be a lot of silence. So let's go to our next question. Number 9. I've got 2 more to go. Is DNA able to provide the mechanism for all of the variation and adaptation seen in the natural world around us? Let me explain the question. So we're not going to argue about DNA. We're going to say, okay, even if we gave you all 1 through 8, all the questions we've been talking about, Big Bang, yeah, we'll just, whatever. You get to have a Big Bang, have proteins, you even get the first cell with DNA. Now, if you've got 1 cell, can you make all that we see in our world now from that 1 cell? And evolutionists say, of course. Now we're really talking about evolution. Evolution, going from 1 single organism, a unicellular creature, to all that we have today. Birds and frogs and manatees and maple trees and bugs, all that we have today came from, in an evolutionary mindset, 1 cell. We're going to say, okay, for discussion today, we're going to give you that living cell. Can the DNA in that 1 cell by itself create all that we have today? Do you understand the question? We're asking, okay, if you have that little cell in the primordial soup, can it evolve? Are there limitations, or can it literally make everything that's living? That's the question we're going to look at today. Okay? So, what we're talking about is genetic variety. DNA, regardless of what the sequence is, can it change its sequence, thereby creating brand new organisms? That's our question. If you have a cell with DNA, can that DNA by itself, just natural, by itself create all the creatures we have in our world? 4 mechanisms are known to produce variety with DNA. There's 4 ways that DNA can make new things. And that's really not true. We'll stick with it. Okay. First one is recombination. Bottom line is 2 creatures mate, and because they're different and they mate, they give half the genetics from 2 different individuals, so the child, prodigy, will be a brand new DNA that never existed before. Your kids. They're not you, they're not your spouse, they're somewhere in the middle. Okay? That's recombination. Some of the traits that they have came from you, some traits came from your spouse, and so there's some kind of blend. That produces variety. Especially because during the process of making eggs and sperm, we're going to talk humans because we are most comfortable with that. Well, maybe not comfortable, familiar with that. when you are creating sperm or eggs, the chromosomes, sometimes they'll overlap like this, okay? They always line up together, but sometimes they'll overlap, and sometimes the pointer finger on my right hand will break and switch places with the pointer finger on my left hand. So we create a chromosome that never was before. See, you have a chromosome from your mom, and you have a chromosome from your dad. But here, with crossing over, now you create a chromosome that never existed before. It's mostly your mom's, with a little bit of, a kind of a tail of your dad, and this was mostly your dad with a little tail of your mom. This is recombination. What you're doing, sorry, I'm getting too detailed, aren't I? What you're doing is you're getting some new DNA, but it's human DNA, it's of the very same genes, it's just an alternate form. Like, for instance, your mom has black hair, your dad has green hair. Blonde hair, okay, I'll come up with it. I was just looking at you guys and all I could think is no hair. Sorry. Okay, so now, because they're crossing over, something new exists. And it's dirty blonde hair. Is this making sense? Just trying to give you an idea. It's something new, but it's still 100% human. It's still hair. It's just some type of a variety of what already is existing. Okay? So, recombination, will it create brand new, different kinds of organisms? Answer, no. Won't do it. Have you ever seen a cow give birth to a chicken? That's just funny, but that's what I'm talking about. You get what you start with. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Hybridization. Hybridization. That's when you put two different species together and they mate and they have offspring. Okay? Hybridization. We have lots of hybrids, lots of things that in our world that are hybrids. Like here's a legitimate animal. You know what that's called?
A liger.
It's called a liger. That's a hybrid. It's I think a female lion and a male tiger. It doesn't work the other way around. Somehow it has to be that way. But they'll breed and this animal will be able to have offspring. It's amazing. It's a hybrid. But what is it still? Still a cat. Yeah, it's still a cat. So there's ability. Now, that didn't run around the savannah before humans got ingenious with sex pheromones. But you know what? They produced it. It's a hybrid. Lots of the plants in your garden are hybrids. Because they found, especially like fruit trees, apple trees, roses, they found that the roots of just ugly roses are really tough and strong. So they'll take a good, strong root and what do? They'll graft something on it. That's not really a hybrid, but it gives you the idea where they're using something of both. But at the end of the day, you still have a cat. At the end of the day, you still have a rose. Okay, so will hybridization bring something new? Answer? No. It's a variation. It's not new. It's not moving in a direction. How about this one? Chromosomal changes. In other words, changing the number of chromosomes. Mostly, this can only be done in plants. But with plants, you can do something called polyploidy, where you have extra copies of the DNA. Like instead of 1 copy or 2 copies, you can have 4 or 16 copies. These guys. Have you ever eaten some of the strawberries we get now? Big, beautiful. They look like they're just going to be amazing. You bite into it, it's like biting into styrofoam. Yeah, that's polyploidy. The whole point is to get something that has a long shelf life and looks great. They don't really care about the taste. And if you do, you stop buying them. You grow your own. Polyploidy. So the extra complements of DNA, but does it change? It doesn't. So what I get the sense that as we go along here, it's like the list is going, but we're not finding anything that can produce something new. what about the next one? Number 4. Gene mutations. Ah, the golden mechanism of evolution. Have you heard that? Yeah. Now, let's just think about something. On TV and in cartoons especially, someone can drink something and they mutate, right? How many of you guys watch Mutant Ninja Turtles? Nobody? Oh man, I'm yeah, well, twice. Yeah, I mean, that's the concept that a lot of society has, is that something can mutate and turn into something new. I want to help you to understand that mutation can only happen in one cell at a time. So a whole organism made out of 1 trillion cells can't all mutate in one single event. It just won't happen. And mutation takes time, and there's this thing called death for most mutations. Let's read through here. So this is a change in the DNA sequence. Instead of A, T, T, G, T, A, A, it changes and has a different sequence. So if it has a different sequence, it's going to have a different code. And that different code is going to code for a different amino acid. So one mutation changes one amino acid in a protein that may have up to, most amino acids, most proteins have like hundreds of amino acids. Okay? So a mutation is very small. And most of the time, you don't even notice. In fact, much of a protein with a mutation or two in it will still work, unless it's at a fold point or at an active site. Some bases will switch, you can't tell. Other bases switch and the whole protein unravels and the cell goes without it. Like people who are diabetics because they don't produce insulin, sometimes it can be a genetic thing where they're just one base pair off and the insulin molecule that their body produces is produced in great quantities, but it doesn't work. That's mutation for you. Let's continue here. Differences in the DNA sequence result in different amino acids and thus different proteins. Mutation usually result in, what is it? Death. Most mutations are lethal, but sometimes non-lethal varieties, such as hornless cattle without horns, that's a benefit to society, isn't it? That's a genetic mutation. Or seedless grapes. Do you like those? Now there's a problem with seedless grapes. They have to spray a hormone on them for the grape to form. So it's not all roses with this. Navel oranges. That's from a mutation. So DNA can account for the great diversity of living creatures within a given kind. Sir?
So DNA is the same as, my DNA is the same as an animal's DNA, as a plant's DNA? It's all the same DNA?
Excellent question. It's made of the same components.
Right.
Your DNA is coded in a different sequence than, say, a dog.
Okay.
There are things that you share. Like the insulin gene, dogs also have an insulin gene. Hair keratin proteins, dogs also have that.
The DNA
So-
is the same, the cell is the same, it's got the same DNA.
So it'd be like Lego
Yes.
blocks and build, would it
Yes.
be?
Yeah,
It'd
that's
be
a
like
good
Lego
analogy.
blocks, but you can build different things. You can build a house
Yeah.
with Lego blocks, you can build whatever.
All living creatures have, except for bacteria, have a nucleus inside their chromosomes made out of the very same DNA that you have. Okay? The sequence is going to be different, kind of like the blueprints for a high-rise and the blueprints for a cottage. They're both on paper, they both have lines, they both have a lot of things in common, but at the end of the day, they're very different blueprints, and you get a very different building. Okay? So yes, a dog, a cat, a bird, a bat, a worm. Worms have the very same red blood cells we have. If you got enough worms together, you could get a transfusion from worms, as long as your blood type lined up. Okay? So, And that's the mentality. It's like we're all the same, so we must come from one place. Okay? Yeah. So, within a given kind, this is biblical language. Back in Genesis, God creates the kinds and says, and each one will produce young after its kind. Okay, so just put that in the left side of your brain. Remember, I'm a pastor and a scientist. So I put that in the left side of my mind. I'm also an imbecile. And I put on the right side, I say, well, if I look in science, do I find a limitation to the DNA activity? In other words, can I take a frog's DNA and mutate it a little bit and come up with a bat? And the answer is no. I might come up with a frog that has 3 legs. I might come up with a frog with no eyes. I might come up with a frog that is somehow deformed, because oftentimes mutations don't add something good. They destroy something good. But I don't come up with anything else. So there seems to be in the laboratory and, of course, in God's Word, this restriction that you can only go so far. You see, the variety is accomplished by natural genetic means. Let me explain to you. Here, this is like mutation. There's a DNA chain. There is a nucleic acid, say guanine or cytosine or adenine or thymine. You take that out, you put a different one in. That would be what a mutation is. Let me illustrate over here. So here, oh, that's crossing over. We'll just go on. Oh, there you go. What's that one? Azores. Good job. Yeah, how about those?
Oh, the kitty.
Have you never seen these? That's a Photoshop. Oh, yes. No. Well, I guess that's the point. Sorry?
Jackalopes.
Jackalopes, yes. That's the point. You never get something like this. Just doesn't happen.
You're scared to death.
That would be cute.
You see, with genetics, what you have is variety, but you remain in the same kind. Look at all these kids lined up there from gonna get a sunburn in the bathroom, you know. Don't turn on the light, you get a sunburn, all the way to dark, rich, and beautiful. There are variations, but how many of those kids are humans? All of them. You see, genetics has a great ability to give variation, but it doesn't make one of those kids into something else. Okay, so let's talk about genetic mutations. There's 4 different kinds. There's point mutations. Okay, so that would be like putting an A instead of a C, adenine instead of cytosine, or guanine instead of thymine. And the amino acid it codes for will be affected. So let me make sure I get to my, here.
I know you have to speak English.
Yeah, don't be afraid to put your hand up and say, oh, stop! Okay, so one of the letters, that would be like I'm spelling and I put a letter wrong in the word. Like instead of spelling T-I-M for Tim, I spell T-O-M and somebody sends it to Tom. Okay, that would be a point mutation. Okay, inversion mutations. Inversion is when you take a piece of the DNA and you flip-flop it. So it would be like spelling my name T-M-I. Tim, but T-M-I. That's an inversion. And it messes with what amino acid you're going to get. Okay? An insertion. That'd be like spelling my name T-I-A-M. You add a new one, and that changes everything. Okay? Or a deletion. You just spell my name T-I. Forget the M. These are different kinds of mutations. One of the things that's really dangerous, though, is when one of the mutations switches the frame. How many bases are read by the transfer RNA? 3. So if you add a base, the whole frame is moved. All the down the line. So now, from here on, every word is going to be misspelled. maybe it will suffice to say, let's look at some pictures here. So here's a point mutation. Bob saw the dog eat the toy. That's our sentence, okay? Every 3 is a codon. So if we do a point mutation, we take one of the letters and we switch it with a different letter. So now instead of Bob saw the dog eat the toy, we have Bob raw the dog eat the toy. There's just one place that's different. That's a point mutation. Okay? If we do an inversion, what we do is we take a piece of the DNA and we switch it, end for end. Okay? We flip it. So instead of Bob saw the dog eat the toy, we have Bob saw the good God eat a toy. So this is much bigger problem. You can see that. You have an insertion where you just add an extra base. Bob saw the do, gia, etu, wa. You see what happened here, 3 at a time, right? 3 at a time, 3 at a time. Uh-oh, if I add an extra, now everything down the line is wrong. This type of mutation is usually fatal. Okay? Because the whole code is wrong. Okay? In the very same way, a deletion mutation is where you take something out. And so Bob saw something was taken out here. And now everything down the line is filling that gap. And it's all read wrong. Computers work this way. What happens if you have an error in the code on a computer? Doesn't work, right? Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question, like you talk about the point mutation, inversion mutation. When we have the people, well, I don't want to say the people, we have other people that speak a whole different language. And they spell it all different, they don't have the A, B, C's, and D's. So what are you going to call that, deletion mutation?
That would be a translation.
Exactly.
Yeah. The one thing that we know about DNA is that all living creatures use the same language. So we can stick with these because we don't need to have all these other different foreign languages. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
I don't understand that. I mean, we have all these different languages. So is that wrong because we have the different languages?
No, the different languages would have to do with something
Totally different.
cultural and communicative. I'm just using English here to show you the different.
Yeah, this can happen in any language.
Or numbers, or
Right.
symbols, or anything else. It's just a segments of 3.
Yeah, it just as long as you think of it as sections of 3. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to translate this to what the impact is for evolution. Evolutionists, this is their golden mechanism to create new forms of life. So then in the laboratory, we should be able to see that in action. In fact, we can cause mutations. So we should be able to go into the laboratory, take some kind of creature, and just mutate the stuffings out of it, and come up with some kind of new creature. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, the animal that is used is this one right here. Fruit flies. Okay? Fruit flies are used, they've been studied for a long, long time.
You still haven't gotten rid of it.
Okay? Yeah, still. Drosophila melanogaster. You can take these fruit flies and you can feed them mutagens. You can x-ray them. You can microwave them. Well, no, they blow up when you do that. You can do all kinds of things to cause mutations. And there's a really interesting quote. Let me just show you some of the mutations that come. Okay, so you have the red eye and the white eye. Okay? Okay, this is a closer look at it. This guy, he's fairly normal. What about that guy over there? No eye.
Normal?
No eye. So you can do all these things. You can make it so that he has an extra set of wings. But what are you noticing? They are all fruit flies. There's no changing it. Fruit flies when you start, fruit flies when you end. bottom line is this. Based on scientific exploration, fruit flies, you get a brand new generation every 2 weeks. They have used fruit flies for long enough, they've gone through 5,000 generations. They've done all kinds of things to these fruit flies, but they still have fruit flies. There's some limitation. Mutation, yes. Changes, yes. But you start with a fruit fly and you come out with a deformed fruit fly or a dead egg. You don't come out with some kind of hopeful monster that's half fruit fly and half cat. It just doesn't happen. So mutation cannot account for the great variety of creatures. Even if you gave them the first unicellular life in that primordial soup, okay, even if we just didn't even argue about all the other stuff and just said, okay, let's assume that there was a cell there, mutation cannot take that cell anywhere. Mutations do not create new DNA. They adjust, adapt old existing DNA. And usually it is in a negative way. Okay? All the mutations in fruit flies came out to be problematic. The guy with 4 wings, he didn't fly faster, he couldn't fly. Because the back wings are supposed to be halteres, which give him like a gyroscope to know how to lean. Obviously the guy with no eyes, that's not a great thing. Variation can better be accounted for by DNA-based adaptive abilities. Here's what we're learning, is that DNA has so much depth that in a given population, there is genetic information that's not being exhibited until it's needed. Genetic information that's just there, latent. We used to call it junk DNA, all the stuff that we didn't know what the DNA was for. And we're learning that that is adaptive DNA, that when it's needed, that DNA can be expressed and the creature can survive things that you don't think it can. Isn't that interesting?
Can you give an example of that?
Oh boy, that's a great question.
Well, a negative example would be cancer, wouldn't it? Potentially cancer,
Cancer is often because of mutations in the growth control region of a cell. It's a good question. Maybe this will be interesting to you. Our cells are made so that they grow at a particular rate. They divide at a particular rate. And that's all controlled by a part of the DNA. And so if that part of the DNA gets broken, the cell will just go crazy and start growing and dividing, growing, dividing, growing, dividing. And the problem with cancer most of the times is that it either produces too much of a substance or it squeezes something important, like your brain or a bile duct, or it takes over your liver. Okay, so that's cancer. I don't really think that fits here. An example of something that's latent would be like in bacteria that are living on a medium where they're eating primarily starch, and all of a sudden they find themselves, these bacteria, in an environment where there's no starch, but there happens to be citrase. And all of a sudden it's doing just as good as ever, but it's digesting this other thing. There's even bacteria, and this is a really good thing for our world, that eat petroleum products. Okay? Don't let them on your Tupperware, but they do a great job in cleaning up an oil spill. Okay? That's something we didn't know about until we found bacteria living in oil spills, digesting the oil.
Okay, so the reason I asked the question is when I was growing up and in school, they used an example of a moth in England. It was originally white,
Yes,
and then
yes.
the coal industry and industrial age happened, and the moth ended up becoming black through years
Let me
in order
tell
to
you-
adapt. That's adaptation.
Let me tell you, that example has been completely refuted by
Yeah,
scientists.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying is.
Yeah, that.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have been in the textbooks as examples of evolution that have been completely proven wrong. One was a moth in England that was either in a gray phase or a white phase. And they postulated that because of all the air pollution that turned the tree bark darker color, that the darker ones would be selected for because the white ones would be easily seen and eaten. And they thought that it was an example of natural selection. But it wasn't. It has nothing to do with populations or dark trees or light trees. They found that they live in different places. The white ones up in the leaves, the dark ones down in the trunks. So it's totally not used. This is something just kind of a broad thing. Lots of things in science change. Things you were taught, about probably about half of them have been refuted by now. And so that's why we were talking about it earlier. We need to hold science loosely. We can't say it's this way, it's always been this way, it always will be this way. Those who make pronouncements, this is how it is, fear those people. Better to say, this is what we think. It seems like this is what we've found. You notice I'm not dying on this hill. Okay? That's an important piece.
Well, I have a question about DNA.
Pastor, there's a
Okay.
question.
You know, we say that everybody can be identified by their DNA because everyone's DNA is different.
Yes.
Now, what does that mean?
Okay. You have a lot of characteristics that, let's just talk about your phenotype, how you look, color of your hair, color of your eyes, color of your skin, because your tone of skin is going to be different than everybody else's. Okay, let's say you have 30 different things that are specific to you. There's no one else that has those exact 30. So your DNA is different than everybody else's. But that's only in which they're called alleles. Okay? Like with eye color. You can have blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes. And it's a case of multiple alleles, but what you have is because of the DNA components that you receive. So those are the ones you receive. No one else received that list but you.
So everybody's DNA is different.
That's why at a crime scene they can
That can
gather
solve
some
each
information,
Yeah.
get the DNA, and they can positively, yeah,
It's like a fingerprint.
yeah, it is, exactly.
I mean, you know, that's just been in the recent.
Yeah.
It's what,
Yeah.
10, 15 years?
I mean, it's not as good as all the sci-fi shows are, you know, all the cop shows where they, you know, they found a hair and they can possibly identify somebody. It's not quite that good.
But I can't imagine all the billions and billions of people that everybody's DNA would be different.
Yeah, so
There's no
probably about
exact matches.
99% identical between all of us. And that last 2%, 1-2%, that's where the variety is with us. Yeah. How about these two dogs? How do you like those guys?
Poor thing.
What is this?
One's a wolf, one's a dog.
Okay, these two creatures are both canine. I'll get your question in a second. Okay? So when we talk about mutations, this is the direction mutations go. Mutations tend to go from a robust creature with a wealth of variety in their DNA to a creature that's tongue is too long for its head. It's pure breeding. When they do that, they start selecting these aspects that they really, really want. My parents have a dog. It's the most hilarious thing in the world. Her tongue literally hangs down to here. Hideous looking creature. Almost as bad as that. World's ugliest dog. Okay, I need to rethink about where I am. Because what we did is we just bounced around a bunch.
Okay, sorry.
So give me just a second. I want to talk about natural selection. Okay. So let's talk about evolutionary theory. All right? Evolutionary theory states that a long process of small changes over time will accomplish the variety we see today, all from one common ancestor. This is evolution. Evolution, the mechanism is a blend of mutation and natural selection. Mutation provides the variety, and the natural selection selects the creatures that are best able to survive. Okay? This is the mechanism that evolutionists use to produce all the creatures that we see today. But there's some serious problems with this. Number one, mutations that result in small changes in an organism are believed to provide the variety of traits that are then acted on by natural selection. The problem is that mutation does not do a good job. I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
I forgot mine too. I had
I'm sorry. It'll come back. So they say that if we can get small changes made and we add those up, get enough small changes made, it can result in everything we have today. And we're going to lean on mutations to do that. So if we can see mutations happening, that will provide us with everything we have today. Okay, so you get the variety by the mutations, and then natural selection chooses the ones that it wants. There's this thing called survival of the fittest. Have you heard of that? Okay, that's natural selection. In other words, you select an organism with the characteristics best able to survive. So if you're in the polar regions, the seal with the thickest fur, most fat, that's the one that's going to survive. So all the skinny seals, skinny balding seals, they die because they can't handle the cold. Is natural selection a real thing? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's everywhere. Even in the job market, right? In our world, it's everywhere, natural selection. Natural selection, not in the job market, but out in the field, is driven by the environment. So if it's cold, it's going to select for the animals that are best able to deal with cold. If it's dry, it'll select for the animals that are best able to deal with dryness. If there's wolves, it'll select for the fastest creatures, or the ones who are best able to hide. That's natural selection. Is that a real thing? Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, it will change a population. A population with wolves around will gradually, the creatures, the babies that have the shorter legs, they're going to get eaten first. And gradually, long-legged animals and long-legged animals will mate, and they'll have more long-legged babies. So over time, long-leggedness gets selected for. Okay? That's a real thing. Okay? What's different is that mutation isn't what provides for long-leggedness. What provides for long-leggedness is the robustness of the genetic complement in the animals. Their DNA already have that component. Most of the time, mutations result in decrease of size and strength. So, natural selection is a real thing. It happens around us. We can see evidence of it, but you can't lay that at the foot of mutation. So, creation of genetic material, does natural selection produce new genetic material? No. Does it create new variations? Yes. How does that work? Well, we need to look at Darwin's finches. These guys. You heard about Darwin's finches, right? This is kind of the beginning of evolutionary thought. Darwin went on the Beagle, that's a boat, sailing around the world, looking at things, got to these islands called the Galapagos, and he's looking around and he sees all these finches, and so he starts catching them. I believe these are the actual finches that he caught. Do you see any differences in those finches? 90% of that finch is identical, but the beaks are different. Short, stubby, hooked, I don't know, fat, big, strong. What's really interesting about these birds is that a given clutch of finches will have babies with variety of beaks. Just like your kids. If you have more than 2 kids, you might have a 6'2" kid and a 4'1" kid. I have one. My daughter is here and my son's above me. Okay? Wait a second. Same parents. Well, that is genetic variety. That's a natural thing that happens. Now, in the world we live in, they can both survive. But what if there was only food high up? Who's going to survive better? Well, as a human, we're going to share, right? But if we were dumb animals that were in competition, right? My son, he would get more food than my daughter. The world would be selecting for him. Yes, ma'am.
You know, that's not necessarily so. Even though they may be taller than you may be smarter than him.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So, as Darwin's looking at these finches, he's noticing they're all finches, but their beaks are different. He also notices they live in different habitats. He also notices they eat different. I mean, literally, the Galapagos Islands are a number of islands. Some are very different than others. Some have some kinds of plants, some have other kinds of plants. So the birds that lived in the area where there were just these hard-shelled seeds tended to be the thick-beaked, almost nutcracker type beak. Why? Because they're the ones that can get the seeds open and eat. So the ones with the little tiny beak, not going to make it there. But on another island where there's lots of insects, guess what? This guy's in the greatest population. But they're all finches, and here's the thing, they can all interbreed. I mean, they may not think they look just right, but the big beak guy and the little beak one can breed. They can produce viable offspring. So here's a question, are they a different species or not? No. Are they different? Yes, but they're all birds. They're all finches, and they can interbreed.
So is variation the proper term?
Variation is a perfect term. Variation. In Darwin's mind, he started thinking evolution. Was there some evolution involved here? Answer, yes. Absolutely.
Within
You know
the
what
species.
evolution means?
Evolve.
Evolution means change. There was evolution here in the population. Not in each individual, but in the population.
Within the species.
Within the species.
Yeah, so you can't have something crawl out of the proverbial soup that's a fish that turns into a finch.
Right.
No.
That's right.
Okay, let me just say it this way. We have no experiential evidence that that has ever happened.
Right.
What we have is we have variety, and then we, as humans, have made up a story. And that story is evolution. Micro, let me just throw out the term, microevolution. I know a lot of people hate that term. Micro means small. It means evolution in a small way. It's evolution within a species. You start with a bird, you end with a bird that's a little different. That happens in our world, can be shown 20 times a second. It's all over the place. You can take guppies and create evolution in a matter of a couple generations. It's amazing. Mice will do that too. Those who make lots of babies tend to evolve quickly, but at the end of the day you have the same organism.
So look at flowers. I mean, you know, even the peas, the sweet peas, the yellow kind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's genetic variation within a species.
So what about birds? You see Carolina bluebirds, you see robins, you see cardinals. They don't seem to interbreed,
Right. So,
but they're all birds.
they're all birds.
But they're different species.
Yeah, so let's hang off on that concept, okay? There's a limitation at some point where whether species or family, where they do not cross a line. And with different creatures, that line is, that section is wider or narrower, okay? We'll come back to that. I may ask you to ask it again. So here's a nice mutation. No, that's not.
Photoshop.
Here we are. Macroevolution. So microevolution, variation within a genus or species. Some people would say a family. Kingdom, following, class, order, family, genus, species. So right at the end. Macroevolution is this concept that if you have enough microevolution, you'll end up with something totally different. If we start with a finch and wait long enough, we'll get to a lizard. Actually, it goes the other way around, right? That's their concept. Is that we can cross boundaries if we wait long enough. But what do I say here? It's never been documented. With all of our scientific prowess, we've not been able to do it. We've not been able to take a finch. Now I say that, today we can do it, but it's not a natural means. Today we can take DNA from one creature and DNA from another creature and swap them together and come up with something that's literally never existed before. Genetic engineering. We can do that now. But that's not happening in the primordial soup. There was no geneticist in the primordial soup linking DNA together.
Yeah, but you just said you can't take a cow and make it into a lion, or take a cow and a lion. You can't mix that. You can mix cats. You can mix
No.
cows.
What I'm saying is
Right.
you can take DNA from a cow and DNA from a lion and link it together and come up with some composite beast.
Would it live?
It depends. You can take, if you take mostly cow and a little bit of lion, it'll live and have some type of, genetic amalgamation is going on now at a very scary rate. Yes. And but that's not what happens in the natural world. That happens in a laboratory with very careful monitoring and production. Yes?
Would that also include genetic modified organisms?
Yeah, so GMOs, GMOs, they actually build DNA to give a plant resistance to something like Roundup, so that they can use Roundup to kill everything but their precious corn. Yeah.
Roundup killed a lot of people
Yeah.
too, so.
Yeah, well, all right. We're at the end of this one. I just want to throw one more in for you. Okay? Give me just a minute. I'm going to switch to tonight's. So why don't you take a 5-minute break, get some water, get a few more cookies, and then come back. Some medicine, that sounds good too.
Kim, what are you making?
I'm making a little kind of like a bolero sweater for
That's
me.
what I thought.